you're doing well. I know it's been a while since you've heard this voice on this podcast, but we're back and we're diving heavily into lots of draft talk. The first of which with who I think is my favorite draft analyst. And I don't mean to do this to flatter. I just mean to introduce them in a way that I think correctly describes their presence in the dialogue, in the field. PD Webb, whose work I think is expansive, it's intelligent, and I enjoy it very much. He's here to discuss Jalen Green, how he pertains to the Raptors, and the in-depth stuff on his game. You can find his Twitter at AboveTheBreak3. You can just type in PD Webb Patron on Google, and you'll find all of his stuff. PD, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, flattered, but great. Wonderful to be here and talk about a prospect that I've tremendously enjoyed watching the past couple of years.
Okay, so let's just dive right in then. Tremendously enjoying Jalen Green. He looks like a guy who could go as high as 2. I've heard you say elsewhere that you heard more buzz for Mobley for number 1 than you'd heard for Green. Of course, most of, if not all, the buzz is still for Cade at number 1. I know you're not sourced out like Shams or Woj, but do you have any inkling on what the feeling is around Jalen Green, his range, although it's obviously a very small range at this point?
Yeah, I think that just based on how the lottery fell, it's 2 to 4. I think that if a team with a true primary creator had gotten number 1 already on their roster, then Jalen would make a lot more sense because his ability to complement that sort of player who makes more decisions is phenomenal. Not that he can't do that, just that I think that his highest outcome is being the heavy scorer, but not necessarily the heavy decision maker. I think that he could go 2 or he could go 4 unless Cleveland makes a trade at 3. I've been under the assumption that this is going to be the wackiest draft in the last 5 or so years, just based on how the lottery fell, how many teams have double picks, how many players are available in trades, something that I'm sure the Raptors have been talking about quite a bit, and how many things can go sideways from where we stand as a mock draft now to what happens on draft night.
Okay. And so we have a couple questions pertaining to this thing, which I'll just cover quick based from the Raptors' point of view. And it's moving up in the draft to 2 or 3, presumably to make sure that they get one of Mobley or one of Green. And in this scenario, I think it's quite obvious that the Raptors would be betting that they'd end up with Suggs, and they don't view his potential as highly as the other 2. I think recently to move up in that gap has been close to a future pick and a decent future pick. So with the Raptors, it becomes tough because you're probably projecting them as a decent team at the very least next year, especially if they're getting a prospect of the caliber of a Mobley or a Green and moving up to get them. But historically, it hasn't been too heavy a price. It's typically been a future pick in one of the next 2 years drafts. So I guess it really depends on who's above the Raptors and what they're willing to take, how they see the projected prospects lining up with their own timeline, how they evaluate those guys, because Cleveland could be super low on one of Mobley or Green, for example, and could be, irrationally high to some people on Suggs. And so I can only go by the history of these kinds of moves. And I think it would maybe be somewhat, not a blue chip prospect on the Raptors, but a meaningful young player and perhaps a pick, or just straight up a future pick, depending on what the other team is willing to take. And depending on if they have a guy a little bit later, if they have a guy who they think will be around 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever, then there's a lot of mobility. And as PD said, it could get really wacky. So I think that's as far as anybody could go right now, outside of somebody who is absolutely completely plugged into the Raptors front office, which appears to be nobody ever. So, but that's asked by Mark Nisbet and DeAndre Ayton, who is Ayton Tobin, who co-hosts the Off Court podcast, which I think is one of the best things you could listen to right now. So,
agreed.
We'll get into Jalen Green. Let's do the Cliff Notes. Walk me through what I'm supposed to like about his game and what might underwhelm me?
I mean, I think that the thing that jumps out initially with Jalen Green is that he's like the prototypical two guard, in that he is ultra explosive. He gets downhill in a hurry and then does spectacular things when he gets there. In the sort of like mid 2000s guard mold, he's also like a tremendous shot maker. So the last 2 years, he spent, I would say, most of his development on shooting off the dribble. So teams that are pushing him towards screens, he's very comfortable taking side steps and step back threes and shooting them at a good percentage. The thing about youth development is like it may not be like what looks like an NBA percentage, but if like you're shooting 34% on difficult shots as a high schooler, or 32% on really difficult shots as a high schooler, like that's very good. Just because like the percentages eventually come around. It's getting them off in games and getting the rates off in games that are more important. And I think that when a lot of people who come from an NBA perspective see that kind of stuff, like who aren't enmeshed in the draft year round, like some of us are cursed to be, it can be like, oh yeah, like I have him for the lifetime of attempts, which is all of his FIBA stuff, the 1 year of Adidas, the 1 year of Nike, the Ignite year, and his senior season at Prolific Prep. I have him at 32% from three. But considering the self-creation volume, that's pretty awesome. You'd obviously, I think he will be a shooter off the dribble long term, and that's sort of the combination of being able to East Bay in the half court. If teams bite on the jumper and if they sag off, being able to knock it down. That scoring pathway is the thing that jumps out. I mean, I think the things that maybe like will, I don't want to say disappoint, but the differences between him and like a Cade or what we would consider like heliocentric big wings is that he's a scorer first. He can pass. He's a solid playmaker, but he's not a player that would be asked to have the ball in their hands for 80% of all possessions. He's best making fast decisions against a defense in rotation, whether that's in transition, whether that's on a swing, and punishing defenses for any mistake it makes, guarding him one-on-one or not sending help over the top. And while it's not bad, it's just not to the level that we would have expected from wings in the top five in recent years. I think that with the successes of Anthony Edwards in the second half of the season, and to some degree the successes of Zion, that like there are different pathways of like guards who take primary usage but secondary decision-making volume as a really positive player archetype and a player development strategy.
So not as comparison points, but more so a frame of reference. If we're looking at difficult shot making, allowing for growth at the next level, Jason Tatum is somebody I've heard you talk about in relation to making tough shots, taking tough shots, being bored with the process of lower level basketball. And then also with the playmaking bent, there's guys like Devin Booker, for example, or Zach LaVine, who were score first, and they've slowly been accumulating playmaking chops. Is there any type of crossover there that you see as far as development or skill?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Devin liked the mid-range a little bit more. Tatum was always bigger, and like that's the thing that really makes development wonky. If you can just like be jumbo sized, it's really hard to develop because like what's a high schooler supposed to do to high school senior Jason Tatum? He can get whatever shots he wants to. Green is an overwhelming athlete, but it's also really skinny. So like there are types of guys who do trouble him, just based on his high hips and his a little bit looser dribble. I think Zach LaVine's an interesting point because like Jalen is a much better playmaker than Zach was at the same age. So I think that the development of Zach LaVine has been informative to how Jalen Green like approached the process and was like, oh, okay, like our games are, somewhat similar aesthetically, and we certainly like to get to the same spots. So taking, the experiences that Zach had at his his first 2 years in the league and sort of dislocating them onto like junior and sophomore, Jalen Green is sort of what allowed him to develop playmaking at a faster pace rather than just coming in and being like, yeah, I'm here to get 20, and get an assist here or there when there's no option for me to score. He's definitely not approaching the game from that way, which I felt like Zach was certainly in his 1 year at UCLA.
You talked about that 32%, that 3-point shooting. Let's dive just a little bit deeper into that. Jump shot, pull-up mechanics. Is there, a ceiling you see for him at the next level? is there a wide variety of shots that you think he'll be making from three, or do you think he'll be more versatile in the mid-range? And then I guess in a little bit we'll talk about, craft at the rim and guile and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I do want to clarify like two quick things. The first is that like that 32% is the lifetime that's going back all the way to him being 16 years old. For just the G League sample, on 85 attempts, he shot 36.5%, which is very positive considering like this is with an NBA line, which basically everybody else doesn't shoot with. The second thing is that the G League experimented with a 2-for-1 free throw rule. So this makes true shooting and free throw rate a little bit wonky. So if you go to like websites like Tankathon or Basketball Reference and look at the G League stats, they have assumed that the regular free throw attempts, not the G League attempts, and that makes everybody's free throw rate skew downward and their true shooting skew up, because it looks like they scored more on less attempts because every free throw was worth 2 until 2 minutes of the each end of each half.
Okay, that's definitely worth pointing out. Okay, so if we are looking at because that's what we're seeing in the playoffs currently, is guys who aren't all out superstars, they become infinitely more valuable in the vacuum of the playoffs by having, quite a few counters out of the pick and roll, typically somewhat in isolation, pulling up from, a wide variety of places. There's a lot of guys, I know you like the stutter rip from Jimmy Butler as, a setup and a finishing piece, but for example, Jalen Green, is there something you see that he's very clearly going to be developing at the next level?
Yeah, I would say I would say there's 3 moves that really like jump out for his creation setup. Like he loves to play out of hang dribbles, which are sort of like a between the legs where you bounce up, and you're trying to get the defender to rise up. If they rise up, you can blow by them. If they stay down, you can just hop directly into your jumper. He loves side steps. Huge, long legs. The short shorts do extenuate how long his legs are, but he's really capable of getting like horizontal separation. So if players aren't the fastest or the quickest in small spaces, he can just hard pound dribble, sidestep, cover about 6 feet of space, and pull up. And then the last one, I think is probably the most dangerous, is a move called the T-Mac, where you drive the ball downwards and you plant your front foot like you're going to blow by them. And most defenders, especially when you're covering something like Jalen Green, who's incredibly quick downhill, probably has the best first step in the draft, they back off, and then you simply kill your forward momentum and pull up in that. So hard dribble, lower your center of gravity, push, just like you're going to the hoop, and then you stop directly at 3-point line to pull up. Obviously made famous by, former Raptor Tracy McGrady. I think that I was really, really positive about the development that he had shooting off the dribble. He took 61 off the dribble attempts, not just threes, just any off the dribble twos included. That's how Synergy logs these things, which is, and he got 0.87 points per possession, which to me is pretty good. He's also doing it on like not all off the dribble attempts are created the same. You have to, sidestep into them, T-Mac into them, hang dribble pulls. 0.87 points per possession is pretty awesome.
So as far as what he's working with currently, how that's going to translate, is this a guy you see, and not definitively, but he'll have a range of outcomes? Do you see a lot of those outcomes, including a guy who can get an offense out of a lull, can plug in and can stop runs, and perhaps can be one of those guys who you hand the ball to at the end of a game when teams aren't giving you much? The only thing left is, advantage creation for yourself, and this is what comes of it.
Yeah, I would say that that's probably one of the better bets in this class, is that like that's sort of the thing that I think he comes into really easily, is the shot creation, is the ability to knock down tough shots, and the ability to create open spaces for himself, especially going horizontally and backwards. The mechanics are 1-2. He shoots a little bit, like with a little bit of sweep in his lower body, so his legs can flare out a little bit. It's honestly a pretty technically smooth jumper. I think that there is some room for it to be smoothed down in terms of time it takes to get out of his hand. There's a small hitch at the top. Sometimes he hesitates a little bit to pull it. But all in all, like I would say maybe Wiggins is the last like hyper athlete who had this good looking of a jumper. Usually those two things aren't congruous for young wing prospects, and the jumper comes later. But it's fairly developed with a good amount of versatility.
Excellent. Okay, let's get into a little bit of the playmaking. You talked about him being more advanced coming out of the draft than Zach LaVine in UCLA. But so for Raptors fans who are listening, maybe you won't be able to put it into words, but the passes you see that are most often made by certain players, like OG Anunoby attacking a closeout from the 45 extended. The ball probably is going to end up in the opposite corner if he's making that pass. The help side is going to come over. That's the pass he's going to make, and he's going to make it when he has 1 foot in the paint. Fred VanVleet, it could go to either corner. It could go to above the break. Either way, he's probably not getting all the way to the rim. These are the passes that he's making. And Pascal Siakam has a wider variety of passes that he makes, although turnovers are kind of coupled with that. A lot of times because he's getting pressure in doubles. What are the good passes that you're seeing from Jalen Green a lot of the time? And is there mistakes he makes often as a playmaker?
Yeah, I mean, I think that his best passes are when he has the ball around shoulder level. Um, he has like small pocket passes, but he generally likes to play outside of his body. So like his handle is based on like these big looping movements and trying to get defenders to lose a little bit of their balance. And that's where his best passes come from too. It's just getting the ball out quick. It's not always like one-handed hook passes, but he has a variety outside of his body. The areas where it's a little bit more difficult is when you put him in small spaces. I mean, this is another problem with his handle, which we'll get to, is that when he has to play within his body, when he has to play out of snaking a pick and roll and the defender's tight and the big is within reach range, like he doesn't have a ton of passing options there. I think that he reads the floor well. He's just not always. He doesn't always have the passing craft to get everything you want out of it. This is fairly well suited for being a second side creator or a big space creator out of high pick and roll. And like, I think that this is a good match of form and function, where like the passes where he's bad at are just generally like situations that I necessarily wouldn't want to put him in on his rookie contract.
Let's dive a little bit into the ball handling, and then I think we'll finish off the offensive side with him specifically, and then we'll get into fit offensively after that. But ball handling, common counters he has to certain types of defense. We've seen Patrick Beverley, maybe more of it is that he smashed into Booker's nose. Maybe more of it is that he's locked in those knees. He's really up in him and he's establishing contact very early. But what does Green have in his toolkit to kind of get around the Patrick Beverley and then maybe a less affecting defender who's kind of going to get caught up on the occasional screen, maybe die a little bit on it, who's going to chase without much, drama and all that kind of stuff? What do you make of his ball handling so far?
So I think that Beverly is sort of the type of defender that Green would thrive against, because what Jalen Green wants a defender to do is try to get in his handle. He wants them to try to rip and to react to every little movement he has, because he's most likely quicker than them. He's most likely more explosive and he can cover ground faster. And so he wants a defender who's really reactive, who is going to change heights with him, is going to change balance with him, and he can just win on the margins there. The sort that gives him trouble is the guys who don't really react too much, who sit there in their strength and say like, okay, this is the spot I want. I'm going to pressure you, but I'm not going to react to anything. I'm just going to sit down and stay down. Like sort of like a Jay Crowder would give him a lot more problems. His handle is based on getting north-south, and it is north-south very violently. So he wants to get when he explodes forward, he wants to get that defender, if he can't turn the corner, leaning forward, then he can snatch back. When you get him in tight spaces, I think his worst habit as a ball handler isn't necessarily sloppiness. It's that he'll bail. So that if he gets into a tight space, he will retreat back into an open space and try to attack again. Sort of like how OG has that, or OG and I guess Pascal, but I think it's a little better now, has the habit where that when they get stuck, they just half spin in space to like sort of reset. Two moves don't work, and they're like, okay, half spin, and they'll try to reattack. Green has that, but it's a big retreat, like 2 steps backwards to go attack again. And to me, it reads more as comfort. Like, it's a thing he doesn't really need to do, but he just wants to find big spaces again. Handle is a weird thing to develop because it's more stylistic. Like, it's stylistic. It's more of an art than a science, and finding things that work for your comfort level and work for where you want to go are more important. So like you would never say like OG has a fantastic handle, but sorry, Pascal. I don't know why I'm looking at OG's name and keep saying Pascal. Or I'm not saying Pascal. Like Pascal doesn't have a great technical handle, but Pascal almost always gets where he wants because he knows exactly what he needs to get there. And he has moves specifically tailored for most of the coverages the teams have. Even then you have the opposite guys who can do a lot of moves, but they're not suited to where they need to go and how the defenses are covering them. I think Green eventually will get to a point where he is comfortable in tight spaces, and part of that is just getting stronger, just getting a more mature body, lowering his hips down, and being comfortable playing at low speeds. In a circumstance where you are playing with Fred VanVleet and Kyle Lowry, two people who are very good playing at slow, if not dead stop speeds, I would imagine you get a little more tips and tricks of the craft, but it's generally positive with some small idiosyncratic stuff that I would say could pretty easily be cleaned up with scheme and development.
Okay, so this probably feeds, into the secondary action, second side action stuff and secondary creator. But as far as wanting to get into big spaces when he resets, that you talked about it being like to be stronger because when you're in the close spaces, you get moved around a lot. But does that speak to his proprioception? And for the listener, his sense of self in space and how he perceives, the other moving objects or not moving or what objects around him in space. And a lot of the best players typically have a high level of feel in proprioception. What do you make of his and how he kind of conveys himself around the court in those scenarios?
Yeah, I think that he does have a good proprioceptive sense. I think the bigger issue is that his sense of balance and his sense of leverage are a little less developed than proprioception. Like he doesn't lose the ball in ways that would concern me, but it's just that close space. He knows that players can get under his hip level. He knows that, I guess it's a high level of knowledge of self because he knows he's weaker there. I mean, being a teenager playing against pros is never particularly easy physically, unless you're built like Braun and Jalen, isn't. So I would say that the concern is just lowering that center of gravity, lowering the thresholds for which he bails. Like I think the bail is always going to be an option for him and thing that he probably uses because it's effective when he retreats and the defender gets too aggressive and he can, hit a big space counter. But just lowering how often he needs it would go a long way for his ball handling effectiveness.
Okay, so let's tie this up then. Do you think it's, again, this is how many outcomes there are, the likelihood of, the high level outcomes, a guy who most likely will be able to get himself to most of the places on the floor that he likes. He'll be able to snake the pick and roll into the middle. He can probably nash a pick and roll at some point in time. And he'll have the handle to take different angles off of screens in the pick and roll and presumably to put the ball down after a closeout, as he's done in G League, like you said, like an East Bay in the half court, stuff like that. But the handle, it's a pro rather than a con at this point, and probably will project as one.
Yes, it's a pro in like most situations for him, and the cons are things that the Raptors specifically don't have to worry about. Like if a team that needed somebody to make 1,000 decisions in a game and was just like we're going 1-4 high or we're going 1-4 flat every possession and you just have to figure it out, that would be a situation where the cons would be more obvious and the cons would be something that is going to be repped out on an NBA floor for a number of years. But because the Raptors have I would say a very good team structure in a way that they're a very set team structure with multiple tiers of usage that are cemented and confirmed at a playoff level. Like they don't necessarily need those things, and those weaknesses aren't going to necessarily need to be revealed, and that they can be worked on in a practice setting and as needed.
Right. So there's like the heliocentric possession where you're getting engaged in like a trap or a double, and you escape dribble, and you still keep your dribble live rather than passing out, and you're just trying to engage the defense in like constant cat and mouse. He could develop that. That's probably in the cards, but that won't be asked of him to take on these huge things. But you talked about leverage earlier, and I think leverage is a really big part of getting to the free throw line is leveraging how the defender is playing and getting them in tough circumstances. So for Raptors fans, they probably see Fred VanVleet get hit at the rim a lot. Maybe they think, wow, Fred should be shooting like 10 free throws a game. But the fact of the matter is that Fred is usually throwing himself into established set defenders, and they're in really good positions. Whereas Kyle Lowry, for example, who is of a similar stature to Fred, is able to compromise defenders a lot of times and leverage that compromised position into free throws. Jalen Green, what do you think his sense is for compromising defenders, and then the recognition when he has them compromised to get easy points, for example?
I think that it's mostly positive. Sometimes he can catch and hold, which I think goes back to our conversation about like not needing a heliocentric role, where like catching and holding is sort of the benefit is that you can assess the situation and play it slowly. Like I think the best usage of Jalen Green is giving him situations that are a little bit more tilted, so he can make those reads faster, and he can use his quickness immediately. Can use his tools in a second side way, whether it's a Nix screen or a stampede action or like a zipper action, where he can just hit. And it's not that he's like, I don't think he's a slow processor. I just think that like he's not at the stage right now where he can instantly punish like all 5 defenders on the court from a high position. He's much better at he's much better at assessing and punishing 2 or 3 defenders, like one side of the floor, than 5 right now, and that could be built towards. I think that your idea about leverage is really important for like how he finishes, because like he gets fouled a good amount. I have it at I think it's 297 from my own calculations of the free throw rate, which is good, especially against pros rather than college players. But he's good at creating contact, but he hasn't quite figured out how to create contact in a way that benefits him every time. So like skinny guys, like creating contact doesn't necessarily mean you get fouled. You have to figure out a way of doing it where you have to get fouled early, so you can find a way to finish. You have to get fouled in a way that you can extend out rather than just collecting what may or may not be a free throw or somebody bumping you in air, and suddenly you have to throw a bad shot if the ref doesn't blow the whistle. And I think that craft and that understanding of where his physical tools lie with regards to the whistle, which like if you're going to be a scorer, understanding how to get the best whistle possible for your skill set is an essential element to be added during every summer. And that's the stuff that like he's good at, but there's still areas for growth to punish teams that think they can be physical with him in the half court because he is on the slight side.
Okay. And as far as in-air creativity, I've heard you make comparisons to Jamal Murray. Everybody should be well acquainted with Jamal Murray's incredible hang and finishes, and he's got a lot in his bag. Jalen Green, as far as being able to finish both hands at the rim, around contact, a wide variety of finishes. Like Pascal Siakam, that was his call to fame in his first year, was the sheer amount of shoulder slots he could release from and angles and just his bank shots and everything like that. It seemed like there was a magnet in the rim. What do you make of Jalen Green's finishing so far?
He has more hang time than Jamal, and at times I think that he tries to use it more. Like instead of going for cheap, like grifty fouls, where like if you jump into a defender a certain way, they will always call a foul, and if you jump it a different way, they basically will never call it. And like at times, I feel like he tries to hang through, like big man challenges. Like if a big goes vertical, he can hang in the air long enough that that's no longer an issue. There's a clip against, I think it's the Minnesota Timberwolves G League affiliate, that he's in the air so long that a NBA level big, whose name is escaping me right now, is touching the ground before Green releases, and they jump at the same time. It's really special. The craft is still developing. Like he has a number of goofy foot finishes. He has a number of like little floaters, but the central idea of like always jumping with an advantage, which like to me is what Pascal's like best at, is that every jumper or every shot he takes around the rim, like he already has an inherent advantage, and he's sort of crafted a number of situations where Green can jump and be like, well, an arrow, I can hang time or figure out this. Like it's Pascal generally shoots from like an almost always win situation, and Green is still has some situations where like bad things can happen if a defender plays it a certain way.
Let's get to fit then. And so offensively, there's a couple things I'm thinking about. The Raptors, typically their pick and roll is run to service scoring for the big man or scoring on an action outside of the pick and roll, a swing pass, something like that. They're just not, they haven't employed, a player who had the talent or the skill to score in bunches out of that play type, or they had Kyle Lowry who could do it when he wanted to, but wasn't necessarily inclined. And before that, it was DeMar DeRozan who made it his business to develop a significant amount of craft, both as a scorer and playmaker in that play type. And then, kind of fell through in the playoffs when teams go under, they pinch in differently, that kind of stuff. But Jalen Green, pick and roll in the Raptors, their scheme, their organization, where you said there's multiple tiers of established usage. He's going to have to play off Pascal Siakam, who it looks like the Raptors are going to indulge more often in post-up playmaking than they are in downhill pick and roll playmaking. And then also playing off of presumably Fred VanVleet, if he ends up on the Raptors, right? Presumably Fred VanVleet spraying out passes. So it seems like he's going to have to try and form up and space out off of post-ups on occasion, and he'll be attacking a lot of closeouts, it seems. And then the Raptors will sprinkle in, presumably, some pick and roll possessions for him. But in those situations, next to the players that the Raptors, that are a very big piece on the Raptors, what do you make of his fit offensively?
I would say it's probably the best fit for him. And I think it's partially because the Raptors are going to give more post-up possessions to Siakam. I think, ideal usage for Jalen Green would be like a slightly pick and roll heavier version of what Ant-Man got in the second half of or his year under Chris Finch, where basically the Timberwolves guaranteed that Ant-Man never touched the ball without an advantage, and he got to read the best possible floor, so that he wouldn't have to make harder, more nuanced NBA choices. I think that Jalen Green is a more developed pick and roll passer and has a higher level feel. But the sort of actions that you can build where it's like there are lob options, that are available if the defense doesn't respect it over top, adding an Iverson cut to the middle of a pick and roll, so that if help side doesn't help over it, then you have a quick advantage recognition moment where the older point guards can be like, okay, help's not there, let Jalen Green be downhill. Those things make a lot of sense if you're giving Pascal more post looks and giving him opportunities to finish off dump offs. I think that an amount of pick and roll is good for him, as it is for most young players, but too much can lead them to drown in all of the difficulties that are reading an NBA defense from a heavy usage perspective. And I would like to see Green in a varied, almost if you're a football watcher, like jet sweep circumstances where you just design, an element of every play where he's on the floor, or if he touches the ball, he's reading it tilted defenses, and the defense has to respond to that because Jalen Green downhill results in very bad circumstances. It is not good if you're a help defender, and I think that that's an element that in the offense that you're outlaying would be very helpful. And when you add the shooting on top of it, I think Jalen Green is a better shooter than Ant-Man as well. I would say that he has shown more consistent flashes of off the dribble shooting as well. So I think that you don't have to go to the degree that Finch went to with Ant-Man, but that's definitely a blueprint I would be interested in exploring. I mean, what Zion did in the second half of the year in terms of those playmaking packages, obviously very different bodies, but the idea is the same, is that you can tilt a defense with his rim gravity and how concerned teams are going to be about him attacking a difficult closeout, and use that to create situations for others. And that may include getting, if you send him on a weak side lob, maybe the big helps him one step over, the ball gets entered to Pascal, and Pascal has an easier post opportunity. Like, you can build a synergistic offense with the pieces that you described pretty easily, and I think that it's one that benefits the developments of multiple players at once.
We made USAA insurance for veterans like Liz and Mike. When they got a bigger car for their soon-to-be bigger family, USAA helped them get covered and find savings.
That was the easy part.
USAA, what you're made of, we're made for.
Yeah, the Raptors had a play that they used to run with Lowry and DeRozan a lot that ended up in a lob, and obviously it's peppered in a lot of their games together. But I do think, yeah, Green. I think it would be a similar type of deployment as Norman Powell, wherein, you have your Iverson cuts, you have a lot of flares, you have a lot of pin downs, and you are getting those advantages. And not only are you asking to make the right reads, attacking downhill off of that, if that's available, but it's screen craft. Are you going to reset? Are you going to back out of, a pin down if the guy cheats? That kind of stuff. Just adding in all those small decisions to make that do eventually help you with, your translation to the pick and roll as well, because you're constantly seeing different permutations of how guys defend screens, where their feet are, and that will just help, I guess, chunk in your brain. Your brain will start kind of orienting how you want to do these things. So, okay, that's good. So you've talked before about Jalen Green and shot preparedness or balance. Something as small as dipping the ball too low, getting to larger spaces when not necessary. Are there other small and correctable things you're seeing with his game?
I don't think that there's too much other than like what we've talked about to this point. I can speak to something that has really developed that is always concerning when you watch like young players who can really get up, is how they land. Learning how to land on dunks is like a real skill, and it's one that adds multiple years onto a player's career, and frequently saves a year here and there from the injuries. Like the most dramatic landing growth is Russell Westbrook. If you go and watch him at UCLA or his first couple of years in the league, like some of the landings he's taking are legitimately like they will hurt you once you've noticed it, because his knees are way in front of his toes. He's not landing on balance, and you have to learn how to like take falls, learn how to balance yourself, wall falling, to land on hip pads, to land on your butt sometimes. And these are the things that keep you from having like weird, like not just strains in the moment, but putting extra pressure on knees that are already playing 82 NBA games and jumping up and down all the time. And when he was younger, I was really worried about it because he took some tough, like I would say similar to Cole Anthony, like really difficult landings. And then I was prepared to see a lot of that similar with the G League Ignite. And there was a focus on not landing improperly. Almost like even when his legs would be like knocked out from under him, whether it's by trying to like do a windmill in traffic, or a pretty frequent one is where like players will try to bring it, it's like not like will bring the ball back to their hip level to try to punch it as hard as possible with one, and like that's one where legs usually kick out, and you get some rough landings. And I watched like 10, 15 of those, and he landed pretty well on all of them. So I would say landing on dunks and landing on just explosiveness is a craft thing that I really saw an improvement from him, which points to proprioception.
The stutter steps and going to the ground and all that stuff, it probably, as you said, will add years to his career, even though, he's feeling the effects of that stuff now. But yeah, I do cringe a lot when I see like you go back to the hip, you come forward, it's like a lever and pulley system, the way your body works. Your right foot is up by your shoulder, your left foot lands flat-footed, and like everything just the shock absorption there, terrible. But okay, so it sounds like we've covered mostly everything as far as offense goes. Let's talk defense, something that's very important to Nick Nurse. Even though the Raptors weren't an impressive team this last year, they're probably going to want decent defensive performances out of guys that they draft. So Jalen Green, defensive feel, what are common mistakes that you've seen made by him? What are common good decisions that you see made by him?
So I will say that playing in the G League is like, this was never before the pandemic, the idea was to have the G League Ignite like barnstorm around the world and play U23 and U19 teams, from the NBA academies and international clubs. And because of the pandemic, they, played against the G League in a bubble. One of the reasons why I would say that the G League didn't want to play like the G League teams initially is the like Raptors 905 and the Spurs teams run offensive sets that put pressure on all 5 positions, and there's hammer screens, and players are ghost cutting. There's a Maggette happening, a 45 cut on on pick and rolls when it's on the opposite slot. And if there's one thing that teenagers are not good at, it's communicating on defense and internalizing defensive spacing. So like what these players are guarding is basically more difficult than anybody else in the draft class, and kind of like more difficult than almost anything that we usually see, because there's also defensive 3 seconds and the standard NBA rules. So when watching this tape, there has to be an acknowledgement that like this is playing on very hard mode. That being said, I think the thing that he is best at is leveraging his quickness. He can reattach from screens really, really well. He has some difficulty fighting over, I think, and under is the thing that he's good at. But he will reattach to a hip very quickly and leverage his quickness, which is if you're going to be skinny, it's important to be persistent at point of attack. The things that are difficult, or the things that are going to be trouble is like you have a quick athletic guy who wants to get out in transition. They're going to gamble. He's not super bad with it. You'll only have a couple of bad gambles where like he's gunning for something that he just has no chance at. But it's a mentality when he's off ball that he is hunting for an errant pass or a deflection, which is I think a way for him to value add in time. But against the Raptors 905 game is probably the first time that anybody had seen the level of movement on this G League Ignite team that was a high schooler. Like this is their first time really being exposed to this kind of stuff. So he's on the skinny side. He has high hips. Like I don't think that there's a possibility for him to like be your big wing guy, who's going to check the Kawhis and Paul Georges of the world. But I think that the long-term vision for him is somebody who can flip between 1 and 2s, show good effort at point of attack and attach to screens well, and then really get after the weak side and sniff out any possibility for turning defense into offense.
That fits really well with the Raptors' defensive ethos, especially if you're looking at limitations. Can't guard up. OG Anunoby presumably going to be there. And even Pascal Siakam has had a lot of success guarding big wings as well, especially in the playoffs against Tatum, for example. And if they do want somebody rangy on the weak side who can, as you say, turn defense into offense, that fits extremely well. So that's encouraging to hear. As far as, it's interesting with Trae Young and how the Rockets and the Warriors, those matchups made everyone think that you couldn't have a guy to be picked on. And Curry did a lot to enhance his defensive value and to not be, where he was early in his career. But very few teams are that Rockets team. And maybe the only one that is close to that would be the healthy Nets this year. So I think like the weakest player on the floor currently is not as big a disadvantage as what we might have previously thought. And I think that the Hawks with Trae Young and how clever they've been hiding him and how much work it is with a 24-second shot clock to kind of sniff out weak defenders. That's a really interesting thing, I think now. Defense, very complex, very intelligent. I enjoy it a lot. But
yeah, I will say that like teams' willingness to hunt like the worst defender on the floor was never going to be as universal as like people claimed it. Where it's just like, oh yeah, find. It's never going to turn into like Dykeman, where it's just like you find the bad guy, you get a switch, you pull the ball out, you go 1-on-1 with 8 people. It's just never going to be that. What it is going to be is like what happened to John Collins, where the Bucks would find him as the corner defender and be like, oh, he's not going to tag, and just spam actions where it's like, it's not he's the weakest on the floor. It's that we found the guy who is uncomfortable in an area, and we have the specific coverage to put him, or we have the specific plays to put him in that coverage until an adjustment is made. Like that's a thing that can be hunted. It's not like this player is a bad defender. Like for the most part, teams will live with that, and you're rarely going to get a team that is willing to hunt a guy for 50 possessions in a game. But what you will get is 8 possessions where if you're bad at a specific element that is important for a part of positional defending, people will hunt that for 8 straight possessions until a switch is made or a team is willing to make that adjustment. So I always thought that was overblown, but it matters. It matters, but it matters in a different way than the popular conception of the idea.
Chris Paul and Michael Porter Jr. is a good example of the same point you made about John Collins, except when Porter Jr. was in the weak side zone, there was just a lot of gaffes as far as decision making, and Chris Paul really made the Nuggets pay for that. But okay, final thoughts on Jalen Green. With everything we've said, if we can get like 40 seconds from you on what you view as Jalen Green, the high octane outcome of his career, and let's get Raptors fans excited if he does drop.
Yeah, I would say that if I had to bet on one player in this class to average 25 points a game, I would have Jalen Green, and it wouldn't require any thinking. I think that he has specific offensive skills that are the direction that the league is going, and the direction that the league is going from a playmaking sense, where people are starting to move away from the idea of true heliocentrism and instead willing to locate decisions outside of like what we would consider as like the guy with the most usage, and like realizing that, hey, maybe there wasn't going to be a bunch of bronze floating around, and like, well, for every Trae Young that there's going to be, it's also just as likely that like you have Kyle Anderson, and like Kyle Anderson has a number of can do a lot of things, the most important which is getting good decisions. So why don't you give him the decisions and then give the scoring to somebody else, and instead of asking one person to do everything, I don't want to say use the old positional system, but you suit talents to what they do best and not asking them to fit, fighting the ghost of LeBron in the same way that the Jordanaires fought the ghost of Jordan. So I would say that if the Raptors are at 4 and Jalen Green is there, they should take him immediately, sprint to the podium, take Jalen Green, and be very happy that they have a building block who complements the roster that they have and also complements the direction of the game, who's going to be extraordinarily exciting on and off the floor, and a quality of player and a level of roster fit that you don't generally get at number 4. I mean, the Raptors have had great luck at number 4, but just looking at the history of the game, usually there has to be some sort of compromise either on talent or on fit, and this appears to be neither. So I would say, if I were the Raptors, I think even if Suggs was there, I would take him over Suggs, just from the situation that they have right now, regardless of who comes back, just the guys that are currently there. To me, this is an ideal fit for both ways.
Mm-hmm. And use your players properly. You brought up Kyle Anderson, using him in the post to play make for those small, big screens to free up Jonas Valanciunas. Orient your players correctly and make sure that you play to their advantages. That's something that I think that Jalen Green would be able to do in Toronto, and I think that's a really exciting thing. Do I think it's likely? I mean, I've seen a lot of people and a lot of, what would the term be, chatter about how exciting Jalen Green is, that it's hard to view him as the guy who falls, but you never really know. I would be over the moon if the Raptors got him. So the good thing about PD Webb is that his work is expansive, and that means that he usually does a lot of it. And as somebody who has been covering the draft, he knows a lot about second-round guys, or perceived to be second-round guys. This isn't necessarily saying they're second-round talents. This list is crowdsourced from people, inquiring minds, I'll say. So we're going to talk about some second-round guys that maybe, possibly, could wind up in the Raptors' lap. There's a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys we'll be talking about. One, we're a little bit behind on film and stuff like that. But first, Daishen Nix, what are your thoughts on him?
Okay, so I, by the time this is out, will have published the Daishen Nix piece that been working on for a week or so. Daishen, I think, had a bit of a struggle. Daishen Nix struggled in his G League Ignite year. The team wasn't really built to around his specific specifications, which are like running a lot of pick and roll and really churning decisions. And that was given more to Green and Kuminga. He struggled as a shooter. The splits are rough. It's 38, 18, 72. He's a big body point guard who I think his stock might not have been stirred by the G League night, but I think that his game probably was. He put on, I would say, some like football muscle to deal with playing against grown men, and it didn't suit his game well. And it revealed what he needed to work on at the next level. I think that as a second round player, you're getting a player with who like needs to develop his jumper. The off the dribble stuff is the problem. His catch and shoot stuff, he's really reticent, but it looks and stats out much better. He's a big bodied guard who has a little bit of a tendency towards the hero pass, but is very creative. And when he gets into the paint, he finishes very well, despite not having fantastic burst. He's changed his body since the G League Ignite season, and he still makes really like good decisions. He's just never going to be like a score first point guard. I don't know where his draft range is going to be because so much of it depends on how much change has been done to the jumper, and that's going to test out on workouts. But he's certainly, if you're a team that is looking for like a big-bodied one who is strong at the point of attack and has passing jobs, certainly an interesting prospect.
Mm-hmm. And born in Alaska. How many NBA players were born in Alaska?
We actually have 2 Alaskan-born players. We have 1 Alaskan-born player and 1 player who grew up in Alaska in this draft cycle. JT Thor was born in Nebraska, but went to, I believe, Anchorage High School.
He has a lot of hype as well. JT,
yes,
he has momentum. I would say
he's got some juice.
Got some juice. Just to dig a little bit deeper, Daishen Nix, you said he makes good decisions. What are some of those decisions that you see that you like that he makes?
So he's really fun out of like snaking pick and roll. His biggest issue is when teams just like straight like go double under, so the guard and the big go under on pick and roll because that forces him to decide if he wants to shoot or not. And he rarely takes, I would say, like an in-rhythm jumper. Prefers to massage the little ball a little bit and then like hesitate into a jumper. But when he gets like an ice coverage, he just puts that guard in jail every single time, carves out space, and is capable of drawing the big forward. In transition, he throws some, I would say, very wonderful passes, including this jumping no look that he did a couple of times where he stares at a wing, jumps so that the wing defender sprints over, and then throws the bounce pass to a cutter who's like cutting in front of the shooter. And he times it so his toes are about to touch the ground. So it looks like a jump pass, and so the guard's just like, "Oh yeah, I'm gambling for this." Ball's out. It's a wonderful one. I like a big bodied guard who throws a 2-handed pass. I know like one-handed skip passing is very in vogue, but the ability when you're bigger to throw like above your head is really valuable. That extra bit of vision. Overall, I think that like he's a prospect who's probably served well by his G League year, as rough as that may seem from like a top 25 prospect to being considered a second rounder. But like, I think this is probably a better learning year than it was a stock year.
The 2-handed pass, less arc, more juice. Okay. Actually, I'm going to be selfish quick because I just want to, you brought up jail. In the NBA, which defender do you think is the most proficient jailbreaker? The guy who can get out of jail the most efficiently.
Is it cheating to say Chris Paul?
No.
Because like, I wouldn't call like how Chris Paul gets out like super technical. He just fights like crazy and has a really good understanding of ankles. If I had to think of like a guy who like I've always liked the really skinny like Matisse is really fun because Matisse is like sort of gives up the jail and tries to lurk, and like there's sort of two like with getting around jail, there's 2 different like schools that you'll talk to. You have the stronger guys, like the stronger, smaller guards generally want to fight for like leverage and get underneath and say like, okay, like I'm going to battle at the position. Like this is sort of like how you get like the clips of James Harden, like trying to like back somebody down facing the wrong way. Then you have the other school, which is usually skinny guys who kind of want to phantom through it where they hide in the blind spot. You think you have a layup and they sneak up from behind it and get the ball. This is your McCall. This is, Matisse. So it sort of depends. I think there's one for each style, and you have guys that will do both, but generally there's a body type that a person is, and a movement style a person is better suited for. I like the angle a little bit better because I think that phantoming works better against like mediocre players, and it's really difficult to do that against the highest level of talent.
Mm-hmm. Pursuit, that's comfortable for some people, but I think that, yeah, you're right. The best players can they'll outfox you. Okay, this one is from Robel. Terrence Shannon Jr. Thoughts on him?
I'm a huge Terrence Shannon Jr. fan, and would be upset if he fell into the second round. I feel like there would. So he comes from Texas Tech, which is a unique defensive system, and one that NBA draft and NBA teams have had to pay a little more attention to, because it's not necessarily like a read-based system. It operates on principles, where it's generally the same read every single time, depending on where the ball is on the floor. So you're always pushing flat towards the baseline, and the defensive off-ball reads are generally the same. This isn't how NBA defense works, and often players coming from the system sort of have to relearn once they get to the league. I mean, I think this was sort of a lot of the confusion about Jared Culver as a defender. It's like, hey, I thought this guy was good at defense. It's like, well, yes and no. He was very, very good at Texas Tech, and he's relearning a new system for the first time. Like, it's not the same thing as Syracuse's 2-3 zone, but it's not entirely different in that it's not the same reads, the same timing, or the same terminology. And so there is going to be an adjustment period. This system also, I would say, pools steals and blocks into certain positions on the floor. So if a player isn't often covering that position, it makes their steal and block numbers look worse. And I think that's what's happening with Shannon, who's a long, bouncy athlete who doesn't have the steal and block rights of, like Zaire Smith, who comes from the same system, but Zaire Smith was covering those specific areas. Shannon is a developing shooter whose jumper I like a lot. It just has some small areas of funk that need to be sorted out. He shoots with like a really severe foot tilt, so his feet, one of his feet is really far forward, and his hips are turned almost like 80 degrees towards the rim. It makes shooting going to his right difficult. I think that he is a pretty easy plug and play wing, and that for all of the difficulties about his jumper, he still had a 55 true shooting, shot 36% from three and 75% from the free throw line. He was seen as like more of a creator during his high school years, and then like sort of and then in the draft process is seen as like a team first defender who can find his own shot as needed. I still think that high school player is in there, and think that there is more scoring to be unlocked as he gets more comfortable. I really would have liked to see him have a higher usage than 25, but Texas Tech didn't really have a ton of usage to go around. He's certainly a developmental candidate I would start to look at in like the mid 20s, but if he shoots poorly in workouts, or teams are less enthused about the translation from Chris Beard's defensive scheme to the NBA, I could see him falling, but not that far in the second round.
Right foot tilt. That's the Lou Williams conundrum when fading to the right, I think. For his jump shot, basically twice as many attempts in year two. He has a pretty significant jump as far as like his efficiency. Was there anything, as you said, it's still developing, but what did you change from year one to year two, if you saw anything?
I mean, I think it was just the confidence. There's minor stuff. Like, I think that the gather time, like the time it took to go from like deciding to shoot to release, took less. I think the footwork was cleaner. He's a guy that like kind of seems right-handed generally. A lot of his gathers are what would be normal for a right-hander. So I think that there's still like some body, like some movement things to be sorted out. And I think that continuing to solve the footwork, full-time hop, to me, he's a full-time hop guy. That would be like an adjustment I would be trying to make with him. But like, if this is a troubled shooter is giving you this, then like, yeah, sign me up for this for long-term development. This This is one I very much enjoy, and just a really fun, tenacious defender. I like he's on the skinny side, and he really likes to fight at point of attack. Uh, Enthusiastic defender, fun to watch.
Is there an idealized situation you have for him that you'd like him to fall into? Like, where do you think he would thrive?
So I would say like for me, I would be thinking like sort of similar to like Kelly Oubre's usage in Phoenix, where you getting him to attack closeouts, like the goal is long term for him to have some passing reads, but like it's not necessary immediately. But just like getting him like getting him to corners where he's comfortable, saying if you get a hard closeout, go put it on somebody's head, and then toggling him between twos and threes defensively with the occasional four. So I mean, I think that could be a lot of places. It's just making sure that he's kind of like the third wing in a team with multiple wing options to throw at the primaries and secondaries of the world.
Okay. Bones Hyland, thoughts on him?
Oh, yes. Bones Hyland is most certainly a first-round pick. Bones Hyland took 13 threes per 100, if I have this correct, which is a number. It is a high number. That puts him like near the Steph Curry, Trae Young type three-point volume. He shot 38 or 37% on almost 9 threes per 36 minutes. He takes ambitious jumpers, and he knocks them down. Double step backs, volleyball line, negative momentum. It doesn't matter. It's going up and it's going down. Probably the second best handle in the class, like him or Sharif, depending on how you prefer, like how you like aesthetically prefer handle. I mean, Sharif's probably a little bit more functional, just because like he's a point guard and Bones is a like a shooter combo slasher type. The issue with him and why he wasn't in the NBA after his freshman year was that he never got fouled. I think he had like a 14% foul rate, and it doubled. It's at 32 now, which is I'm not going to say it's excellent, but it is a huge improvement for a guy who tends skinny, and for him to double his free throw rate in a season where he had like a 55% 3-point attempt rate is really positive. He handled huge usage. He's like never going to be he's not a lockdown defender by any means, but like he has quick hands and like certainly has an understanding of passing angles defensively that like there's something there. I think he's always going to be the fifth defender in a lineup, but you can do a lot worse than self-creating shooter with range within the gym with a really, really just liquid handle.
Mm-hmm. His scrimmage game at the Combine went exceptionally well, did it not? I saw a couple highlights from that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there was anything like the money you could have got on Bones Hyland fries in a scrimmage setting. Like that's a setting that he is like basically hardwired to dominate because he could shoot from extended range, and like there's not in scrimmages people don't really build walls to protect the rim, so he's always just going to like slink by whatever help defense is there, and yeah, when he gets hot it's really fun to watch.
Is he a gambler defensively? Like his steals? Yeah, okay, I kind of figured. Okay, let's do Wieskamp, Joe Wieskamp.
Okay, Joe's Wieskamp is is probably one of the 3 best shooters in this draft. I think he's the best by percentage. The 3 to me are Kispert, Wieskamp, and Bones. Bones doesn't have a percentage in the 40s, but Bones took shots that like you can't expect people to shoot 40% of. Wieskamp is another combine riser. He tested at like 42-inch vertical, but there's some questions about how standing reaches are measured. So like at the combine, your vertical is basically like whatever number you jump on the little like spinny thing, minus your standing reach. And standing reaches are pretty easy to fudge. And so you'll see players who have like a +6 wingspan, but their standing reach is for whatever reason like 3 inches shorter than expected, and suddenly they jump 48 inches. I'm not saying that this is what's happening, but I would compare like Joe Wieskamp or Keon Johnson or Jericho Sims' standing reach to expected standing reaches of others and make a decision for yourself. Again, no particular accusation, just noting that there is a thing that happens at these combines, and Wieskamp still jumped a very high number. Wieskamp still played very well, and anybody who shoots 46% from three, taking 6 threes per game, and to be honest, he should have been shooting more threes, is going to have value in the league. If he moves his feet well enough is going to be a question. I think that if you are a person who likes the idea of Corey Kispert, but doesn't necessarily want to pay because Kispert prices, Wieskamp is sort of the same idea, but a player who is going to be either like a late first or early second bet on the same sorts of skills.
Okay, while I have you here, this is a departure from the second round thing, but as we know, Bones and maybe everybody who's been mentioned so far has been a departure from second round. But let's do the Corey Kispert thing, because quite a few people have asked me about him. I'm not sure why Raptors fans are so enamored, but I've been asked about him quite a few times. What are your thoughts on Kispert?
Yeah, Kispert's really fun. I don't really understand what you mean by they're asking, like they want him to be taken at 4.
No, they just keep asking me about him, and I say like, yeah, I don't know, I don't see a roadmap to Kispert, but maybe because Gonzaga has always been kind of tied to Canada as well. I'm not sure, but there's interest, and not as this is the roadmap to get him, just for people who listen to the podcast. What do you think?
I guess if the roadmap might be like
entering the Brandon Ingram sweepstakes and giving up enough that you also get number 10. Like that's obviously a much larger trade, but like I don't think I would take Kispert at 10, but like I guess there's a roadmap of sorts. I think that the curious thing about Kispert is the shooting is extremely real, but it's also not extremely versatile. So Kispert has really deep range, but his shooting profile is like basically the opposite of Bones, where like Bones didn't get a lot of what I would consider as like easy looks, and Kispert is really capable of shooting off negative momentum, off sprints, catch and shoots, but he isn't really comfortable shooting off the dribble. So he never really had to, partially because like Gonzaga was a legendarily good basketball team, but also because like when you're a legendarily good basketball team, what's the point in doing anything other than like the thing that's beating teams by 60 points? So he wasn't really in a space to like explore the studio space. And as a result of that, only took like 9 jumpers off the dribble, I think. And I think if you're going to take a shooter at any, like in the lottery, you either need to have a roadmap for maximize, if they're like a catch and shoot guy or, a movement shooter, getting as much value out of that by having a playbook that's centered around that. I mean, like, the Doc Rivers, JJ Redick thing, where their playbook was centered around the shooting gravity of JJ Redick. Or if it's a shooter off the dribble, having them involved in elements where you can create that gravity in a different way. And I think that to return that value, you have to lean in on that. And I'm not certain that the Raptors have that roster or really like the willingness to carve out that much for a catch and shoot guy. Like I think the idea holds. Like I think he's a much better defender than what he is given credit for. Partially because he kind of looks like a Degrassi character. But if he were a guy who had more shooting off the bounce juice, it would make more sense to me just based on where the roster is and knowing that there is a bit of a hole for off the dribble creation.
If Kispert can't make it in the league, there's a spot for him on the Handsome Boy modeling podcast for sure.
I mean, I would be shocked if he doesn't, but I mean, maybe maybe in the future. I mean, everybody, a basketball career, even its best, only lasts about 15 years, and like maybe he's going to be the next CEO of the Handsome Boy Model Podcast Network. In 2046 or whatever.
That's right. Okay. Next guy, David Johnson, who you are admittedly not finished your deep dive on. The scouting process has not been completed for him. But is there any preliminary things that people should know?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, the question is like, is this just an idea that like the Raptors love every big-bodied guard? Like this is just everybody has a type, and that, like Masai seems to love his guards to be a little bigger, like in the weight room sense of the word, not like in the John Hammond Orlando Magic sense.
It's you'd think so, right? There's always been that kind of like hearty, chunky soup aspect to the guards that they're bringing on. Maybe that's why Campaign didn't kick it in Toronto, right? Obviously, Campaign deserves a lot of love for reinventing and working on so many micro skills and stuff like that. But maybe he didn't make it in Toronto and didn't develop that there because he's very slight fella.
Like Phoenix likes a slight guy. I'm just gonna say it. They seem to like a slight guy, and Toronto is just cut from a slightly different cloth. You have to meet certain lofty expectations physically, and like not everybody can be built like Kyle Lowry, and that's great. It's just that Toronto might not be the place for you as a guard.
Okay, Neemias Queta, thoughts on him?
I mean, it all comes down to how much you think he can move his feet. Neemias is a massive human being, but he's basically an exclusively drop big, which I think is like it has value, despite drop being the drop conversation is X and O nerds version of like analytics, where like it can be blamed for anything. Like anytime a team loses and they play one possession of drop, they're like, well, this is drop's fault. And it's like, well, we don't have to do this, y'all. I think that with any like massive, like if you're drafting a center, you have to build like a scheme that brings surplus value, and it has to align perfectly with the other players if you're drafting them later. Like you're not, when you're drafting a big, it's more about already having like a 4-man lineup or the theory of a 4-man lineup, and you're adding a fifth. And I don't really have that that 4-man lineup that plays a certain way that you can drag and drop Neemias into. That's just my general philosophy on bigs. Like if you were to say like Yves Pons, for example, who like is a player who will either be drafted in the second round or will be a UDFA. If you wanted to say like, we have a 4-man lineup, which I think that the Raptors do, and you're like, we want to play this, 6'6" center who tries to block literally every shot, who plays as hard as possible, who will take jumpers, though it's still developing, knocks down free throws, and plays harder than basically anybody ever. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense to me. In terms of like how you would get him onto the floor, and that like there's already a style of play that doesn't need to be adapted for him because it just has the institutional values already in place. He's simply an addition to that. Where Neemias, there has to be more adjustments, and that's just something I'm uncomfortable with draft capitals for centers, unless they have some other fantastic skill like shooting or the ability to run offense through them or something. Yves Pons has never made a business decision in his life, and I love him for it. He's like one of the most fantastic people in this draft, just in terms of from the term of being cool, but also from the perspective of like he's such a good guy that he doesn't show up in his own legitimately awesome highlight tape because he tries to dunk on and block every shot. But he also shows up in other people's because he will try to jump for stuff that he just has no business jumping for. He's like at the free throw line, somebody else is about to lay it in, he'll jump for it. Somebody's about to dunk, he has no chance, he'll jump for it. And I think that's great, and that shows a loving and focused team spirit.
It's perpetually in the vicinity and something to love as well. PD, I think we've done it. I think we've had the Jalen Green plus some not really second round options conversation. How do you feel about it?
I feel great.
Honestly, I'm pretty sure in the Toronto market, this is going to be the de facto Jalen Green podcast. So I think we've really done something here. Thank you very much for coming on, man.
Thank you.
And so now the floor is set for you to plug away. You can go heavy-handed sales pitch. You can do the humble thing. Whatever you want to do, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me on on this wonderful podcast, the definitive Jalen Green podcast. The other ones are unfortunately bootleg. It's been stamped. So you can find me on Twitter at Above the Break 3. My writing is on Patreon, where all the work is free. But if you have it in your heart or in your budget to throw me a couple bucks, it's greatly appreciated. Stats and video packages are not particularly cheap, and the donations of patrons have kept me doing this rather than having to wash dishes or work tables during a pandemic. And I cannot thank them, or potentially you, if you want to become them, enough. So shout out to them. I write long form draft articles. I think I've done like 10 in this cycle, including Jalen Green, which can be found there. If you are not so much of a reader and more of a visual person, I've started a series called Let's Watch Film, where me and a various guest join me to watch a game from a prospect, talk about what we're seeing, talk about how we evaluate, examples from somebody, another player doing that particular skill well, how you can work on it. It's just spending an hour and a half watching basketball and hanging out. We usually do that on Fridays. If this is coming out Monday, tonight we will be doing the Evan Mobley stream with Ricky O'Donnell, which can be found on twitch.tv/pdweb. If you can't make it, it's all on YouTube. Just search Let's Watch Film and you will find me. So I just want to say thank you for anyone who has been on this journey with me. And thank you, Samson, for having me.
Of course. And now here's my time to double down. PD, especially since you're always so gracious to come on and talk to me, whether it's this podcast or bouncing around, you always say yes. And listener, I give cosigns all the time, and it's largely because I only bring people on to the podcast that are of year. But PD, the way that his work informs the conversation is in a really healthy way, in a super informative way, and in a draft culture that sometimes at the top end is just only interested in providing answers. He's very interested in providing process. And not only, it's not wrong either. It's somebody who knows a great deal about basketball, which I hope you've absorbed throughout this podcast, inviting you into their thought process, how they evaluate. And it is infinitely valuable because dripping with every sentence is some sort of minute thing about basketball that I've never, and a lot of people have never thought about. And it introduces so many different aspects of basketball to fans in a digestible way. And his work is phenomenal. It is one of the best things that I encounter when he puts out something new. I prioritize it. I listen, and I always learn a lot. And I think it's a fantastic resource unto itself. So PD, thank you so much for coming on, man. I'm sure we'll be linking up for something else later on. And yeah, I hope you have a great day, man.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And listener, that's it. But if you want to rate the podcast, feel free to do so, but only if it's a good rating. I'm not really interested in the bad ones. It's bad vibes. And I think it's a good podcast. So if you wanna support, feel free to do so. Check out PD's stuff, the Patreon, Let's Watch Film on Twitch or on YouTube. And I'll let you get out of here. So thanks for tuning in, whether you got into this in the morning or at night. The definitive Jalen Green podcast. Have a blessed day, and goodbye. 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 Goodbye.